Uh, Josh, are you going to start or should you want me to start?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeff Grobe. I'm a landscape architect with the LCP team. And this purpose of the second half of these two-part workshops is to, in the first half, present you with some detailed information on a specific topic. And then wait a week or two and y'all talk amongst yourselves and then come back with comments from the constituents that you represent or that you're here as their representative. So what we'd like to do this time is there's going to be no more new information presented, but rather what we want to do is get everyone's thoughts on what you heard or what you saw or what you think on what was on the material that was presented last time. So we'll start off first by taking a look at these sections through the core area downtown there. And I'm really interested in getting folks' ideas, excuse me, on what they saw last time and whatever you may think would be valuable information for us to take forward. So if you can move this slide one forward, we had two basic options, option A and option B. Oh, first, good point. What we were looking to do here with the cross sections is we need to comply with all the complete street policies of LCG and the APC and the DOTD. But we're looking to also to get greater mobility through the area and reduce delay for many reasons, for the reasons of safety and air pollution, et cetera. We want this to be a safe corridor for everybody, not just the cars, but the pedestrians and the bikers and everybody else. We also want to do it efficiently, cost-wise, especially for maintenance, because this is going to be a road that's going to be there for some time. You want to minimize the maintenance costs because that's just a prudent thing to do. We want to certainly include at this point, it's now time to factor in how this core area section can connect with the existing bike network and promote bike and ped uses. And we want to make sure that the sidewalk on the outside of what would be this boulevard really fits in with an urban commercial development context and scenario, because this is from now moving forward, especially in this area, there'll be changes coming, and you want to have a facility, a transportation facility that supports that. And that's what we're looking for your input now to help us understand what you think might be best. So let's now go to that first section. Nice. We had option A and option B. And these were presented last time, and they have, there's two lanes in each direction, northbound, southbound. There's a center median. It has a striped out shoulder, not particularly designated as a bike path, but you could use it as that. There's a 2-foot offset from the curb. Then there's a 12-foot sidewalk. And then there's another, it looks like 11 or 13 feet more between there and the property line for utilities or other uses. And with that, I'll be quiet. And I'd really like to hear what people think of this typical section, and we'll compare it to option B in a minute. But if you wouldn't mind, I'd really like to hear some of your thoughts.
Jeff, just before people start chiming in, one additional thought there is the double turn lanes that you see right below the tree. That is only applicable to the signalized option.
Yes, thank you.
In the roundabout option, there would not be turn lanes. You would use the roundabout instead to make the turning movements that you need to make.
Thanks, Joe. I appreciate it. Good point. And there are also, I'll add another thing because Joe added one, I'll add two. You'll see below that too, that there are two ways of dealing with the sidewalk. You can do it, we can do that with a band along behind the curb that's 6 feet, and then have a 6-foot sidewalk. And that 6-foot strip, the first 6 feet could be continuous planting, it could be a GI, a green infrastructure facility, it could be lots of things, or not. So you have that variable as well. So let's hear. I'm going to be quiet now. I'm going to listen to what the folks on the committee have to say.
What I found kind of shocking on the presentation yesterday was actually in the signalized version, you are crossing specifically at a signal where there is a turning lane, where you're crossing 6 lanes of traffic specifically in all of those cases. And that's just not a safe crossing, from my opinion. And I don't think it would ever be used. I mean, we do have a few examples in our city as it is right now that are state highways, which I think this would effectively be. But if you look at Johnson Street at Camellia, no human being in their right mind would ever cross that street at that intersection, no matter how big the crosswalk might be. So I think it's unrealistic to say that that's a safe crossing. I really do like this rendering, though. I hope it happens this way.
Thanks. Well, the crosswalk width is a function of capacity. The crossing distance is a function of how many lanes you're going across. And here you're only crossing 2 11-foot lanes plus a little bit of shoulder and stuff. So there are probably,
Excuse me.
before you can reach the refuge in the middle.
Yeah, except where you'd be crossing 1, 2, 3, 4 11-foot lanes to get to the refuge in the middle. Just
No. Oh, yeah, well, yeah. In one distance, and the other says it's just 2.
correct.
And, just keep things in perspective, that is not uncommon from other signalized intersections all over the state. Whenever the crossing distance is too much to accomplish in one phase, the pedestrian refuge is there to make a 2-stage crossing. So, let's just say that there was only 15 or so seconds to get across the entire street. Well, instead, that pedestrian could stop in the ped refuge and then wait for the next phase to continue the maneuver.
And that sounds dangerous to me, and I doubt people would actually do it. So it feels to me like this effectively would be a wall as opposed to actually a safe crossable corridor.
Okay.
Thanks for your input.
We can compare and contrast that with when we go to the roundabout and how that would work for you. Let's hold that thought. Anybody else have a thought on this cross section?
Yeah, I thought this is Tom. So I thought the street sections were good. I mean, I prefer obviously that we have planting the trees on the side, which I think could have a huge impact on the street. But I think it's a good section with everything that you concluded. Obviously, I also like the one with the bike paths in there as well. But I agree that those, it's tough to get across. But I think that what's nice about a boulevard, it gives you a place to rest once you go across, and I appreciate that. I think that's the value of a boulevard.
Yeah, the pedestrian refuge is an important aspect of this, because not everybody's going to make it across in one shot. So let's go to, well, anybody else? I'm sorry, I'm just jumping ahead here. Anybody have any other thoughts on this, what you see in front of you right now?
Jeff, you want to maybe expand more about the section at the bottom?
Yes, sir. That is what what is the northbound Evangeline will be rebuilt as a local street. It's going to be 1 lane in each direction with a bike path and a 7-foot sidewalk with a 2-foot offset from the bike path to the curb. And that's going to be a local Lafayette street. So you have the boulevard, and then you've got what's going to be replaced in where the northbound is now with that section that you see on the bottom of the screen.
I guess I also had a comment about the kind of the scope of the project. I mean, in the cross section, you see the 132 total row to foot total row width? I mean, is everything within that width, conceived of as being built as part of this project and then accommodating development
Yes.
on either side?
Yes.
Uh,
It's the between the right-of-way lines, everything that you see in between would be constructed as part of this project. And then it provides for at that right-of-way and out the potential for future development, whatever that may be, based on future city plans.
And on the
Okay.
left-hand side, we're looking at the remaining lot depth of 170 feet, which would be between that patch of grass or whatever you got right there, that's 11 feet wide, and the actual border of the new bridge.
Yes, that is correct.
So I'm just curious because then that's prospective development site, which
Potentially, yes.
Yes.
and I see that obviously rendered that way. I'm just curious, are there examples that exist that show effective development on lots that size that are adjacent to an interstate in an urban area like this? Just curious because obviously you can draw a thing, but that doesn't mean that it's going to happen that way. And I'm curious if there actually are cases where it happens that way.
I have to believe there are. I don't have it on the top of my head right now, but I'm sure we can provide that. I think the point is that once this facility is in place, that the potential for development beyond it can be construed in many different ways, depending on then what city future plans would be. So that's not a total question that we can answer now in any event.
And you may see some examples of that when we provide the responses to the chat questions that were submitted last week.
True. Yes, we had that. We've come up with several of those to demonstrate that, but there's plenty of examples, and let's find more. Let's go to the next one. The second slide here. If you'd advance that. Option B in the Quarry. And now the real difference here, Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, but the only difference here is really using, you got the same two 11-foot lanes and a 2-foot offset, but then you got a 5-foot actual dedicated bike lane that is called such. On option A, it's a shoulder that bikers will use, but it's not the same as a bike lane that's called out as such. And it's a little more formal here. And the sidewalk and the 11 feet to the property line on either side are both the same as well.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that, Jeff, is that what we're showing is actually a buffered bike lane. And that what that is providing space, a striped out space between the bike lane itself and the adjacent travel lane. And that's really for safety considerations to make sure that bikers feel safe as they drive down the road.
Correct. So option A, where it's kind of a shoulder, and option B, where it's a little bit more, as they say in the trade, robust.
Right. So it's a little bit wider section, and you can kind of see on the left side, the remaining lot depth decreased because the section is a little wider. Does that make sense?
Yeah, by a couple feet.
Yep.
So your comments, please.
Hey, this is Sarah from the MPO. And I will say from a safety perspective, we much prefer the dedicated bike lane than just a shoulder where the bike people can use. It's just a much safer option, and there's less conflict, honestly, between cars and bicyclists.
Yes, my response would be is if you're trying to encourage mixed use development, you would want the mixed transportation options. I appreciate that there's a 2-foot bumper between the traffic and the actual cycle lane as a dedicated lane, which is, 2 feet more than you have on Johnson Street, I'll say. And I mean, I think that's beneficial. It does still seem like an awfully long distance to cross on foot at a light, even with a pedestrian refuge. I'm curious too about the speed limit that would be in effect for this. I understand with 11-foot wide road beds that, you know, it's kind of dieted, but what would actual speed limit be? Which I think has a lot to say about safety of cars adjacent to bicycles.
So, in regards to the speed limit, and like I mentioned last week, we have heard a desire from the locals in the past that there's a need to want to slow this area down. It is heavily residential, and the plan and the hope, I think, or the desire is to have higher interaction and pedestrian activity in this area. And you know, that's one of the talking points and comparison points between the signalized option and the roundabout option. You know, when you have signals and everyone has a green, the cars don't really stop, versus a roundabout where folks are, you know, kind of forced to slow down and navigate through the roundabout. And in between those roundabouts, especially when you have consecutive roundabout intersections, it really makes for an overall lower operating speed through this area.
But would there be a lower speed limit in this area?
Yes, and that is something that DOTD is definitely considering. I think, and Josh Arush is on the phone right now. He can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that we're considering 30 or 35 mile per hour speed in this area.
I don't remember exactly what the speed limit was, but whenever you're going to have a 4-lane divided highway, you need to make all the improvements that you can to hopefully slow down vehicles. And this is what this typical section is trying to accomplish by adding vegetation in the median, potential, you know, having bike lanes and even potentially vegetation on the outside edges. You know, but that vehicles are going to drive what they feel, regardless of what kind of sign you put, you know. So anything that you can do to you know, make it feel like a slower roadway will only, you know, help bring those speeds down. I do agree with Joe that the roundabout has it is also, it helps reduce speeds just because of the nature of a roundabout corridor. But, and for this typical section, the improvements or the enhancements that they're doing to the section is about all, I mean, the most you can do to try to slow down this vehicle, other than, you know, curving the roadway or adding more geometric changes. So I think they've done a good job of trying to create the atmosphere of a slower signalized corridor.
Yeah, this is Keely from Acadiana. I don't have a thought on what exactly the speed limit should be, but we have, you know, learned in the course of this process that and in earlier discussions about the merits of a Grand Boulevard, which we're glad to see that this Grand Boulevard option is where we're focusing our time now. But those generally slower speeds have shown to increase commerce in the area too, because people feel safer to be walking and biking in the area, and so they'll stop at the stores more frequently. So we're definitely interested in what that speed limit is going to look like moving forward.
And I guess
Yeah, this is Tom again. I like this section even better because of the separation of the bikes. Again, I would just I would prefer greenery on the street, so the trees, to have those on the side as well. And again, I think it's a good section. It's it's always good to have 11 feet lanes to slow the traffic down going through those, because the neighborhoods are off to the side there. So that's important for those pedestrians.
We recommend you slow it down. How about that?
Thanks. Thank you all for those comments. Are there any thoughts or ideas about not only what's featured here, but connectivity between adjacent streets? Any desires there?
I was going to ask if anything, this is Keely with One Acadiana again. In the adjacent streets, because some Grand Boulevard designs have like parking along the Grand Boulevard to encourage those, to help encourage those lower speeds and have spaces for people to just hop out and walk into a business that's, you know, right on that area. But if we're not considering that here, is that something we're considering in these like neighboring streets? Is there even a discussion happening about the possibility? Because that could also make sure that this is fostering more of like a bike ped friendly area.
I would say that from a project perspective, we are not considering that along any of the adjacent streets. However, the city and the MPO would probably be charged with evaluating that and determine the feasibility of it.
Well,
Obviously, the right of way that's out there today is not conducive to accommodating on-street parking the way it's configured now. So there would be likely additional right of way taking and things like that that would need to be considered.
well, I think y'all mentioned using every means possible outside of a speed limit itself to slow down traffic. And if on-street parking, as Keely mentions, is one of those options, I think y'all should explore it.
Well, and what Keely is talking about is on the adjacent streets, not necessarily along Evangeline itself.
I think what she mentioned as well, and Keely, feel free to chime in, was that in other concepts related to the Grand Boulevard, you might have also included parking in adjacency to the street itself, not on all.
It has been used in order to encourage speeds to stay low. I'm not an expert on, you know, like this. I don't know if y'all, I'm sure one of the concerns that you're evaluating when you're looking at the speed limit is like, what is the safest feasible speed limit? Because I know that, you know, this is going to be a high mobility area. And I know people are still going to be trying to get through, like local traffic will still be trying to get through pretty quickly. So I don't know, again, I don't have an opinion on the exact speed limit. I was curious about that because typically in other Grand Boulevards, when they've wanted to keep the speed low, that is something they've done. But I also, you know, I'm not an engineer, so I don't know if it's feasible in this regard, considering, you know, if y'all are considering more of a 30 or above speed limit, then it might, I don't know where the disconnect starts in terms of how, like what speed it's no longer safe to have parking. It was just a thought because you brought up the adjacent corridors, but
Right.
Sam, I mean, you're right about what I was saying about past, you know, other designs in other areas about Grand Boulevards. They've used it to encourage reduced speeds.
Yeah, and I will say, and I want to bring Josh Baruch back into that conversation. I will say that in the early evaluation of the typical sections that we developed, on-street parking was an option. It did not make the final cut. However, I think the recommendation from DOTD in regards to what they would be comfortable with constructing, we ended up with options A and options B.
That makes sense. I got you. I thought it might be a case of it would be too high a speed for the safety of that, but it also makes sense that y'all would have to be, that probably the city would be the owner, whether there would be parking in adjacent areas.
Right. We'd have preliminary concepts with boulevard parking, but what you see here is what we finally came in agreement with DOTD. Joe's right. Sorry, I left for a few minutes for some unknown reason. Maybe they put me in a timeout space or something, I don't know. Do we have any other, might have missed a few comments, but if there aren't any others, let's move along. Go to the next slide. I think that would be good. So here you see the option A in a hypothetical axonometric showing you what 2 lanes and a shoulder and a sidewalk, a 12-foot sidewalk, and the other buffer strip might look like. Now, don't look at the appurtenances or all the stuff, but just look at the general configuration of how this is laying out. And you can see on the left, you can see the sidewalk and the buffer strip and some development right up against the property line. On the right-hand side, you can see the sidewalk and that buffer strip, and then maybe a little more that might be more like what's out, if you butt it up against what's out there today. But you got the median, you got the 2 lanes, you got the 2-foot strips on either side, and you got, in this case, the 4-foot shoulder. And this is for illustrative purposes only, nothing more than just to show you spatial configuration, really. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think it makes sense as an illustration of the other thing you showed us.
Thank you. Well, let's compare this one against the next one. That's option B, same sort. I'm sorry, option A. This is different with a little bit more different kind of. If we're going to do different kind of
Planters.
plantings and stuff on the side.
Yeah.
So go to the next one. These versus the option B, which has the dedicated 5-foot bike lane and the buffer that Joe described. And then still the same 12-foot sidewalk, 11-foot setback from that to the right of way. And we have the same median, same 2 11-foot lanes. And that's really the only difference between A and B is how that bike path is treated. Shoulder non-described, or B with a real bike lane dedicated. Your thoughts? Now, back to what Sam was saying, by the way, if you look up in the top of the picture, you look far into the distance, you can see it approaching a roundabout where it doesn't have turn lanes. We'll get to that, but you can notice up top there that it's 2 lanes right into the circle. Any thoughts on this one?
Is the roundabout in both options? It looks like it is, right?
I think it was. If you go back
And-
in there.
Yeah, it's shown in both options, but if the signalized option was chosen, there would not be roundabouts in the core area.
Right. We just picked one of them to.
Yeah, we just picked one to go with.
Yeah, just to illustrate it.
Okay, so it's really option A signalized, option A roundabout, option B signalized, option B roundabout.
Correct.
Correct.
Yeah, so two different discussions. Okey doke. Well, let's move ahead here. What do we got next? Here you go. So to answer someone's question earlier, here we are coming up to the roundabout, and you can see how one would move through that, both if you're in a vehicle or if you're a pedestrian or a bicyclist. And again, we've taken 2 sides of the street. Left-hand side is commercial or mixed use or residential development right up to the right-of-way line. The left-hand side is more coming up to what might be, some of the things that are out there today, maybe by 16th Street or so, right, that kind of thing. So it's two looks, and these are all made up, but it's 2 looks at how you would deal with a boulevard in 2 you know, the same area with two different contexts, whether you're going to build right to it or if you're going to have a little more space around it. This is how the roundabout would work. Any thoughts on this one?
Here's my observation is just, it seems like a lot more land use for roads and less for people and other modes of transit.
Sarah, has the APC evaluated the roundabout versus signalized on the safety end?
And it's much more safer for a roundabout than it is at a signalized intersections. So a lot of the concerns that Sam brought up earlier would not necessarily be the same concerns with the roundabouts, because, and again, everybody keeps talking about slower speeds and such, right? Roundabouts automatically slow down people because you just can't travel that fast between the two. And again, it is a much safer option, less vehicular crashes, and slowing down the speeds for pedestrians and bicyclists.
To piggyback on that too, the roundabout is designed to, you know, the tight radius on the roundabout itself is designed to create those speeds within the roundabout of around 20 to 25 miles an hour. And considering the number of roundabouts that we would have along the corridor, it would help promote that slower speed between the roundabouts as well. Just to kind of add that to that.
That's correct. That's correct. Thanks, Josh. Do we have any other thoughts on this image? We could go to the next piece is bike connectivity.
I just have one question really quickly. I'm sorry. And Sam, I'm sorry, I heard you. I will make sure that you get to go after me really quick. I just want to ask because I was not able to be on the last meeting, and I have looked at some of the documents from that meeting, but I just want to, because I might have to hop off here, and this is a very important conversation. Is the only other thing we're going to talk about after these four things we've just talked about, the bike ped options for each route, or is there another item? Is there another feedback?
Yes, there's going to be some more talk about some of the street furnishings and stuff that we showed last time. And there's going to be, oh goodness gracious, I forgot. I'll give you a tip, don't ever get old.
I'll try.
Jeff and Scott, we should probably mention that we're going to be talking about stormwater management rather and green infrastructure.
Oh, yes, thank you.
That was breaking up, but I think he mentioned stormwater retention and green infrastructure.
Yes, thank you. Yes, thanks. So, yeah, but this is a big deal. You're absolutely right. And we want to get good feedback, good comments, because this is where it counts. And to give us your opinion on how you think this will work for y'all and if it makes sense is why we're here. That's why we show you this, because we want to hear from you.
I guess just on the subject of roundabouts, because that's what we're looking at, I just observed that, you know, while this might slow traffic down from, say, a straight run highway,
Yeah.
It is still faster than stopped, which is the only speed at which a car should be near a pedestrian in a crosswalk.
Can someone explain a little bit to everyone how cars are supposed to act as they approach a roundabout? What's the protocol here?
So as you approach a roundabout, as you're driving, you should see, and according to DOTD's policy, you should see a series of signs that alert you that a roundabout is approaching. There's going to be an advisory speed that's probably like 15 miles per hour. So that is already a warning and indication that you should slow down to the, you know, the approaching traffic conditions that you are headed towards. Before you get to the roundabout, there will be a crosswalk, and it is very likely that a pedestrian may be crossing the street at that point. In Louisiana, pedestrians have the right of way if they're in the street. So before a car even gets to the roundabout, if a pedestrian's in the street, they're required to let them cross. But you know, like we talked about, the fact that there are a series of roundabouts, more often than not, there's going to be probably some queue of cars that are waiting to enter the roundabout, which, you know, these cars are probably going to be crawling at a very slow pace, and will provide those openings for people to cross the street. And, you know, obviously, if a car sees a pedestrian crossing, they're not going to continue through until that pedestrian clears the roadway.
Yeah, further to that, you can see these pedestrian crossings are all crossing just 2 lanes each time they go across pavement to
Right.
to a refuge area, which is very important. And like Joe said, vehicles must yield to pedestrians in the crosswalk. They have the right, pedestrians have the right of way.
And I wonder, how well do you feel those rules are understood for the average Louisiana driver compared to a red light, meaning stop?
And you're right, Mr. Oliver, there will probably be some level of education that needs to kind of go out with this option if it proceeds forward. There are roundabouts that have been constructed in Louisiana and operate well today. And, you know, from a pedestrian safety standpoint, and maybe Josh could speak to this a little more, but I haven't heard of any, you know, major incidents between pedestrians and vehicles at roundabout locations. As a matter of fact, it's quite the opposite when compared against a signalized intersection, where pedestrians have to look almost in 3 different directions before they cross the street, because not only do you have to worry about the traffic that on the road that you're crossing, but also the people that may be taking a left turn that are headed into the lane that you are trying to cross. So there's a benefit to roundabouts with a pedestrian crossing, because the pedestrians really only have to look in one general direction before they cross the street. So it reduces those conflict points and potential areas of conflict where a vehicle may impede the path of a pedestrian.
You're right, Joe. And I think as they become more common, people will get more used to it and understand how to do it.
Right.
Hey, Jeff and Joe, I'm sorry. We're just running a little bit behind. I know this is important, but also the bike and ped piece next, we definitely want to get to. So if we can move on and then maybe come back around. If there's any questions at the end, we can.
Bree, thank you for being there. Thank you.
Can I just add one thing to that? Just quickly, I realize the slow speed environment again is what's going to help in that crossing. The 2-stage maneuver is also going to help, but there's also other countermeasures that could be implemented, such as a hawk signal, which would essentially warn the driver that a pedestrian is in the crosswalk and allowed for that movement. It's not something that we would do on the front end. We would, look at the operation of the roundabout, or it's not something that we've considered at this point on the front end of the design, as far as I recall, but it is something that could be implemented if it was necessary.
It's a great question.
Thanks, Josh.
Yeah, that's really important. If that's, we can put that in consideration as well. And that'll further towards the point of pedestrian safety for sure. Let's move to the bike network. So here we're looking that we're going to, anything that's part of this job, well, let me step back. We will build anything that is a proposed MPO or LCG plan today or up until construction starts. If it's within the footprint of this project, we will build it as part of this project because it's in the project wherewithal. And we will, it says here, we're going to match everything that we're tying into. Also means that we're going to have to collaborate with the LCG specialists and the parish, the planning area to do that. And, we know that there's different kinds of facilities for different kinds of users. There's really, you have there's a casual biker, parent with their child, and there's the person that's making it to work down in, south end of town or something. So there's two kinds of users or more, and we have to develop a facility that suits everybody.
I'll just say that I think that speaks to the importance of designing with the idea that the roadway is not just a line between 2 points, and about the connectivity for passing through traffic, but ideally a roadway like this, especially the Grand Boulevard kind of idea, is a destination.
Yeah.
So it's not about going around it or past it safely and quickly. It should be about, and I mean, for the neighborhood we're talking about, an urban neighborhood, it should be about going to it and from it, because this is where people live and work.
Yes. So that's an excellent point. We want to make that work for everybody and make it a good experience for everybody and a safe experience for everyone. So if we go to the next slide, we can see some of the things that we know we're going to have to be tying into or be dealing with. Joe, why don't you take this,
Okay.
please?
So, and I guess I'll work my way from the top of the screen down. But basically what this is showing, and I don't know, Jeff don't know if you mentioned it or not, but we did do a little research in regards to Lafayette's plan for bikes, and we kind of tried to blend as much of it into our plan as possible. But generally speaking, we are going to be providing sidewalks along the entire length of the corridor, or at least up to University and Surrey Street. But as far as bicycles, there will also be provisions for them either through that section A or section B that we talked about before. And the dotted green line that you see kind of represents where we are proposing multi-use paths. You would have, for instance, something along Willow Street, because I think that's what's planned in the master plan along Willow. But then in between the new interstate, basically in between the structures on the ground, you would have a path that basically followed that alignment all the way through. Now, as you get into the core area, once you cross Simcoe Street and getting into 2nd and 3rd and points south of there, there are different accommodations, there are different connections that need to be made. And, these circles with the numbers in them, 1, 2, 3, and 4, really just kind of designate different configurations that was called out by the plan. However, it may not be proposed that way in our design. However, we would provide some type of connection within the project limits to whatever infrastructure is out there today. If there were no infrastructure, then I think DOTD would make a decision as to whether or not that connectivity would need to be made.
Well, I think what we want to say, Joe, is we want to put in everything that if it's not there, they have a plan would tie to in the right configuration and location.
Yes.
Right. And that's just to make, because this was a big hole in the planning aspect, rightfully so, holding this out until this plan for I-49 came to be, so that everything else could then, would know how to tie into it and deal with it. So
Right.
It's a long time coming in that sense.
And the goal here is not, again, Evangeline kind of creates a wall between the east and west sides of that corridor today. We would also provide cross connectivity. Do not mistake the dotted green line that kind of follows our new alignment to be the only path. There would be east-west connections as well.
Correct.
Can you define a multi-use pathway?
A multi-use path is, by definition, is a facility that pedestrians and bicycle users could use.
Got it. So I mean, visually, it kind of looks like a wider sidewalk that might have demarcation showing a walking side, biking side.
That is correct. And, it depends on the anticipated amount of usership, but multi-use paths could, like you say, be delineated with stripes, or it could just be, like you said, a wide paved area.
There could be a dedicated path.
Right.
Could have
Trail.
its own separate thing, depending on what makes most sense for where you're at.
Right.
And those have to follow things like ADA accessibility, et cetera. So
Mhm.
Yes,
continuous.
Absolutely.
line and grade, the whole bit. Yeah. But its focus is on bikes and peds only.
Correct.
Solamente.
Great.
Let's go to the next slide here.
So this is continuing south. We're crossing Johnston Street and point south of there, approaching Taft and 14th and ultimately Pinhook. But again, we would be providing some bike and ped accommodations through this area. Now, as we get into the Freetown, Puerto Rico district, obviously there are some things that we kind of mentioned this last week, where we thought we saw out there today what looked to be like a multi-use path. However, we were corrected in that, I think the desire was for bicycles to use Taft Street, the actual roadway pavement, instead of having a separated path. As I look at Google Earth, there's obviously a much wider sidewalk on the south side of Taft Street than what we would imagine to be just a standard sidewalk. So which is part of the reason why we may have mistaken it for a shared use path. Either way, we would be providing some type of accommodation for bikes and peds. Again, as long as we have something that we can connect to, because we don't want to, give the perception of connectivity and then all of a sudden introduce some type of dead end where they have to do something different once they get outside of our project.
Right. Absolutely correct. It has to make sense and it has to make it whole.
Right.
So if you look down there at number 8, the Atacapis, I never got that one right. Very good.
Atacapa, I think it's called.
Oh, yeah, well, I'm not from around here. If you know, everybody knows that, that's okay. There's already a bicycle connection underneath the bridge today. It's not very high, but you can go there. I think we want to improve that experience so that you connect the two sides of Beaver Park. And that's also a big deal, and also making a larger connection in the overall trail. That's an important thing, because that trail is big. That's a biggie. And we want to make sure that we make our improvements as we can within the confines of this project.
Right.
Yeah, I'll never get it right.
So basically the new Vermilion River Bridge crossings would
Yeah.
provide that connectivity across the corridor.
Yes. Yes. And yeah, that'll be a new facility tying into both sides and make that whole as well. Can we go to the next slide?
That's not depicted on this drawing, though.
Yeah, it was. Go back one. I'm sorry. It's just at the bottom there. It's kind of chopped off a little bit, but you see it goes from the east side over there.
Near Fisher Road.
Yeah, by the Vermilionville side, over underneath the new, and then connecting into Beaver Park.
Oh, sorry.
And
I
that'll
think-
get you to what street is that? What's the
University.
street there? Yeah, that'll get you to that, which I think is part of the trail. I think that's part of the trail.
Right, so continuing south, this is University in Surrey. And like Jeff just said, that's the continuation of that Atacapa Eshak Trail. And at this point, anywhere south of University in Surrey is kind of your airport area. It begins a lot of the industrial development in the area. And the thought there is we would kind of terminate the pedestrian and bicycle connectivity parallel to the corridor and kind of send them off along University and ultimately to Hugh Wallace to get to Khalees Saloon instead of trying to fit bikes and peds with the frontage road system and the interstate in this very, very tight area, because you have the railroad on one side and the airport on the other. And it really makes for some very tight constraints.
Yeah, especially at University, getting underneath the railroad and then getting over towards, so you can cross the river and then go down Hugh Wallace, where if you're going to go down to Khalees Saloon, you don't want to be on the interstate side. You want to be on the west side. And right now there's kind of a hunky funky connection from where Hugh Wallace takes that bend to now we're going to, make a positive connection to the planned facility on Khalees Saloon. And that's an improvement for that as well, which would be, really make that connectivity stronger.
Right.
So we've gone through this. I'm getting some good feedback. Does anybody have any other thoughts? I know Keely had to leave, but
Jeff, I would just say that anytime you can interweave pedestrian and bike facilities into, even if those don't exist to a great deal, it would be good for Lafayette to have that infrastructure. All those bike paths starting to connect to another level of pedestrian traffic and shared traffic or bikes. I think it's a good idea. I think we can, if the Fed will build it, then we can combine, connect to that. So I think it's a good thing to have.
You're right, Tom. It's only going to become more and more necessary to have those other means of transportation in place as a viable functioning system.
So Tom, just on that same thought, do you have any strong opinions one way or the other of separated bike lanes versus a combined shared use path that would accommodate peds and bikes?
Well, we built one at the university, and sometimes we were able to separate the pedestrians and the bikes. Sometimes we couldn't, but it's like I think you mentioned there's two kinds of users. There's the family users, and then there's the serious bikers. And the problem right now is we don't have an overall that infrastructure's in our city is not there to marry up to it. But hopefully one day it will be. And the more you have of that, the more that it's more recognizable that the cars give the right of way to bikes. If you can separate the two, the pedestrian and the bike way, that's good. If we can get those, like when you put it down the middle of the infrastructure, we certainly have room to separate it there. It's always good when you can, I've been on those in Europe, and those are quite nice when you can have both of those.
And speaking of separation, it reminds me of something that Derek mentioned last week that I wanted to make sure everybody is aware of. Part of the reason why, or another part of the reason why we would like to send bike and ped traffic along University over to Hugh Wallace is because the Khalees Saloon interchange will be basically a bridge structure that overpasses the railroad and the interstate. So, from a safety standpoint, you would really not like to have your bikes negotiating those steep grades. And then from a pedestrian standpoint, with all of the traffic that's going on, you would rather have everyone still remain on the ground. And that's part of what we're doing at Khalees Saloon. So that's the reason why the Hugh Wallace connection is so important in this area.
That's right. The Khalees Saloom interchange is not going to be ped or bike friendly whatsoever. So
Right.
you want to get away from that and get over onto the flat side so you can get on to where you're really going, which is west down Khalees Saloom.
Right.
Okay, we're doing great, guys. Let's keep going.
All right.
Yes, ma'am. Okey doke. Next up, potential street furnishing. So we presented last time a number of different palettes for your consideration or just some feedback. And we know that we need, if we have a sidewalk, and especially in that core area, it's going to have other furnishings that are going to be necessary. You know, it's an urban area, it's commercial development. There's a chance though to get some local expression going. And we also know that you're going to have to minimize the maintenance costs as much as possible. So from that, last time we presented a series of palettes of furnishings and such that we just want to hear what you think. You like this style better than this style? Is this more suitable to some places but not others? This you hate, this you love. Talk amongst yourself. Tell me your story. Whatever you got. Go to the next slide. So here's one. Oh, we first had to inventory what's out there today. And everybody's seen all of this. It's around town. You know it, you love it. It's Lafayette.
Good example, I think, of kind of what my comment would be, because you see in the top left corner, you see what is like a traffic signal box that is decorated.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's just a plain traffic signal box, but it becomes, you know, a canvas that then gets used in a local decorated context. So, I mean, honestly, I'm very ambivalent about the three different designs y'all presented, but I would love to see something that, you know, something that would excite me is, you know, design options that include space for actual local expression as opposed to just Parisian style versus modern style
Yes.
versus, you know, international airport style. You take my drift.
As it turns out, it's going to be one of the next topics of conversation is actually locating or identifying potential areas for public art and exactly what you're saying. So hold that thought. Can't do everything in one night, but yes, we totally agree with that. And we want to get some more feedback on where some of those potential areas would make the most sense. That's a whole program that we'll discuss at a later date. So here's what's out there today. Let's move on to the next one and see what one grouping might consist of. This one's called the subtle curves. And it's more contemporary. It's a family of pieces that really, you know, they fit with one another, and they make sense among themselves. And the question really is, you know, is this applicable for Lafayette? If so, where? If not, where not? You know, we'll get into that discussion. I think we should look at all of them and maybe then circle back and give me some of your opinions on, I love that one, I hate that one, etc. But this is one. Next. This one really picked up from, especially what Josh was saying last time. It really has a very almost European feel with it, but it's not contemporary. It's more traditional for sure, but it also has a context that has a European influence, absolutely. Then some of these things can be fitted even more specifically for Lafayette. Next. And then here's a more traditional, you see this in a lot of places. It's called traditional and rounded, but you know, you can get any number of families of this stuff. And by the way, if you don't like any of this stuff, there's plenty more where it came from. We picked these families because we thought that they were different enough from one another that you could identify them. We also felt that each of them had something specific to offer Lafayette. Go to the next one. And we also thought that the there was a real preference in a lot of places that we heard for wood. So we looked at what a grouping of wood elements or wood furniture might be, whether it's benches or trash cans or, you know, even light bulbs. You can get wooden light bulbs too if you want. But this is a wooden option, and it's also a little more utilitarian, but it also is much different than the last 3 slides that you saw. So in offering that array of styles, we think that there's something here that can be, you can say, I love it, I hate it, I love it, I love it. And that's exactly what we're going to be doing now. Tell me what you think, please. Don't all talk at once, I'm overwhelmed.
So the only thing I would say about the wood option is we want to make sure that we use a composite so we don't have to worry about, you know, rotting and that such thing. I mean, you know, again, I think about liability from that standpoint on the city side. You know, somebody's going to get a splinter in their finger and they're going to sue the city because they got it while sitting on their bench, right? So that's really the only thing that I would say on the wood option.
Well, there's wood, and then there's steel reinforced plastic lumber, which is environmentally much more appropriate. It has its pluses and minuses, but I think that you're right. I think that we want to only put in quality stuff that'll last a long time. And if it means using certain kinds of woods or certain kinds of finishes, we want to do that so that it's comfortable, it's useful, and our liabilities and maintenance is down to a bare minimum. Thank you.
This is Kathy. Can you all hear me?
Yes, yes.
I like the wood myself, or some composite. Sarah's brings up a good point. I think it's cooler and it reflects, it's not pretentious. And I think it kind of is the most of all of them, like Lafayette.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you'd see it, you know, similarities to what's being developed on the new Monkus Park as well. So I think there's some commonality in other new designs and developments in town that are public.
I see. Thank you. See, this is good to know. I'm glad you can relate that to something else and with a why. Yeah. Anybody else have a thought? Okay.
The problem with wood in our environment, it just rots. I mean, if you don't keep it stained or painted, and I know they make a lot of composites today. They also make a variety of different kinds of plastics that look like wood, but
Yeah.
I'm not too thrilled about that. But there's a reason why they painted wood.
Well,
Yeah.
we've used wood, particularly in a lot of parks around here that doesn't even float, never rots, and is dense as heck. But
Yeah.
you know, it's not. Some of it's sustainably acquired, some of it's not. So you want to be careful in the woods that you pick. But some of it is just as dense as steel, and it won't. They use it, you know, in the old days they used it for cart axles. So and believe me, it's pretty tough. You can't nail it. You can't nail into it. You have to drill it and then screw it. You know, but
I realize you guys get a lot of frost and freeze.
Oh yeah, a little chilly up there.
But it's wow, just the moisture that we get, and if that wood has any grains in it.
Well, you get a good epay going there, and that stuff is like rocks.
Yeah.
But it's wood. It comes, you know, the question is, can you find a sustainable source? You don't want to get it from a non-sustainable source. So we look, and New York City Parks Department doesn't use it anymore, except in rare occasions, if you wanted to, you know, fit something back. But there are other options for that. And believe me, I understand the issue of the moisture. So you have to balance those two things out. It's more comfortable. It's more pleasant to sit on wood than anything else, than granite or steel or anything else. It's more comfy for the bum. Well, but you know, you got to make sure you pick a wood that works over a long time, or else it's just going to be replacing slat after slat, year after year, with splinters in the meantime. So did I see a message there from our webmeister? Did he say we have just some time left, or what is that?
We have about 15 minutes left, Jeff. So let's move on to the last piece and we'll be done.
I think that is the last piece. Thank you.
Oh, that was, I'm sorry.
So I think now what we can do is we can go back and talk more about anything that you want, or, you know, anything else you got. I think this is really a perfect opportunity. We've gotten into some detailed discussion about these certain aspects of the project that are mighty important, where you can give direct input and have a direct impact. So we encourage everyone to speak up and give us the what and why of you know, what are you thinking? That's our reason being here. Anybody have any desires? I'd like to go back to these sections, if you don't mind. If we go back to sheet or slide number, hold on for that information. Let's go look at slide 6 or 7. I think these axionometrics really tell a lot. I'll tell you why. Because now with this, you can start to put in your mind, let's pretend Macomb Vise is on your right, and you got the boulevard here, and then you've got some other development, and you can see the new elevated freeway off to the left. In understanding the spatial arrangement of where this thing sits in relationship to what's proposed and what is potentially possible on the flanking sides of it, starts to give, I think it starts to give a good indication of the realm of possibilities here of what a boulevard can do for this part of Lafayette. And it's going to have real impact, as I think it was Sam said earlier, about being a destination unto itself, because there's going to be things happening here that people are going to come from the sides and up and down to want to get to do here. I mean, this is really your placemaking at its finest, and you're really making this such that it becomes a known entity and an identifier for Lafayette for the next, you know, half a century or so. And that's really what I'd like to get y'all's thoughts upon.
This is Kathy. I'll just mention this again, just for the record. My concerns about the southbound throughway being the location of this grand boulevard. I think the buildings that you're showing there between the superstructure and this grand boulevard are not realistic, given the available land that's going to be there. So and which is, you know, the development potential is key to making this a vibrant urban boulevard.
Right. Kathy, I think that what Josh, who made these, took these from the overall maps that Joe's group had done. And, you know, in plan view, wherever the boulevard was, that's where it was, wherever the elevated was where it was, and just filled in between them with, you know, hypothetical gray boxes to understand massing. But we completely get your point, and that's something that we'll need to continue to discuss, so that everyone understands the reasoning why this is here and why it's here.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point from Kathy, is that, I mean, if you have the option, if we're in a design phase and if there's a using the northbound lane, which is further away from the elevated structure, or the southbound lane, which is closer to the elevated structure. You know, I'd love to find the bank that would finance a construction right next to an interstate like that, because I want them to loan me some money for something else.
Well, in the responses to your questions from the last session, we show you lots of examples of that. Brand new development smack up next to something elevated. So hold that thought.
Yeah, and I lived in Toronto for 15 years. There's 50-story buildings that practically kiss an interstate highway.
Yeah.
I am more concerned about the size of the parcels. And I'm of course always assuming that we have some kind of redevelopment authority or something that can land assemble here, possibly abandon some of the local roads to get appropriate size parcels.
Yeah.
But that's more my concern than, because let's face it, we want the density on this side, not the Macomb-Vise side.
No, you don't.
Of course, some residential density on the Macomb-Vise side would be awesome, but this is the side that, an urban format Walmart needs to be on, or mixed use building that's a few stories needs to be on this side. So that's just more my concern, is the size, the distance, etc.
No, understood. And you combine that with our sensitivity to the existing Macomb-Vise neighbors. There's people that are right up against the northbound, and they're, it's all, good homes, and, it's a viable neighborhood. So you got to be pretty careful there. And also, though, to your point about providing developable parcels that someone would find attractive and would want to, do something with. So I think that will continue to be the discussion.
And ultimately this is a roadway though that's going to have significantly less traffic than what that neighborhood's dealing with currently.
Yes.
So.
Yes. And they're going to have a local street. The northbound, that's now northbound Evangeline is going back to Lafayette Street. So, that's a whole different sack of wax.
Right. Well, if in my mind, if this was on the northbound, the southbound's abandoned entirely as part of the overall land assembly on that side of the Grand Boulevard.
Mm-hmm.
And Eddie, did you want to comment on the lane width?
This is a much smaller point, but I think it's worth raising. There's a lot of talk with these sorts of projects on lane width. You can see in this diagram that there's an 11-foot travel lane, but if you also look a little bit closer at that 2-foot curb on the median, it just looks like from this theoretical rendering that you got about 6 inches of curb and 18 inches of like almost additional roadway, which may create the psychological effect that you got a 13-foot lane, which is faster and it's more dangerous. So I would just, as you're revising designs, make that point. If it's a 2-foot curb, make sure it's raised off of the road so that people aren't driving on it.
That is a good observation, and we'll discuss that more with DOTD. In meeting their design guidelines, there are certain lane widths, and the curb section is kind of considered, even the gutter section of the curb and gutter is considered quote unquote shoulder. But you're right, the appearance or perception could be that the lane is indeed wider. So we'll talk about that and see how that could potentially be mitigated.
Hey, Joe, do they stripe the edge of the cast in place gutter?
Yes.
Okay.
But I think the fact is there could be potentially more paved surface to ride on, so it seems wider,
Yeah, right. Okay. Well, we got 5 minutes, and then we get kicked out of here.
Jeff, what about stormwater detention? Did we want to talk about that?
Yeah. I'm-
So Jeff, you might want to go back to a couple of sections. It's kind of evident here, but maybe not as apparent. If you just go to the 2D section,
There you go.
you can kind of see here where the median is somewhat depressed, where the tree is in the middle. And what that kind of suggests is a bioswale type solution that would insinuate that there could be potential for green infrastructure here.
We have an opportunity here, a big opportunity to take advantage of that median and even the first couple of feet on the sidewalk side on both sides to pick up a lot of that. So let's keep that in mind.
Yeah, I agree that it's a great opportunity. The thruway currently floods quite quickly in a downpour. I think you will have to be really mindful of it not being too suburban in its look, like with more, maybe more dense plantings that can take water. Something that, you know, just makes it more of an urban boulevard as opposed to suburban boulevard.
Oh,
But I
great.
like the concept. I'm definitely supportive of the concept.
Yeah, we're going to be exploring that for sure, because as we all know, it's all about the water.
Yeah,
It's all about the water.
yeah.
Good deal. Well, there's a lot of those opportunities, and we're going to have to do a lot of that management. That's going to be coming up pretty soon. And I know that the city has just dedicated a good chunk of their relief funds towards stormwater relief and infrastructure. So this is just more of the same. That's a good thing. It all ties in together, and we're going to have to deal with that for sure. I don't know what else we can do. If anybody has any closing remarks, I'd like to hear them if you could.
I just think that, I mean, I'm sorry, go ahead if you want.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say that, Eddie and I, so, you know, you all know who I am. Eddie Campany is working in my office now. We're having problems getting notified of the meetings. And I don't know if we're just not being proactive enough. How do we, like, you know, and apologies for being late. I was in a Preservation Commission meeting, but is there something we're not doing right? We both tried to go online and Eddie's tried to sign up.
Yeah, I would just maybe suggest after this meeting, like try and sign up for the emails with a ghost account of some kind, see if you start to receive them. There seemed to have been an issue on my end, and I don't know if it's just me or something that is internal to the system.
Kathy, so you probably need to email either Bree or Jennifer and have them check your email address, and Eddie's not getting the notifications more than likely because he's not on the list, and add him to the list that they have to make sure that you guys are getting the emails.
Okay, Bree,
Thank you,
can I
Sarah.
contact you?
Yeah, I can pass the information along to Jennifer, but definitely we'll look into it. And she's probably right. I don't think I've seen Eddie's name on a list. So we'll make sure that your email is working, Kathy, and that Eddie's also included.
Great, thank you, Bree.
Okay, sorry about that, y'all.
Yeah.
That question, are these being recorded for and shared through the website? Because I also noted that the I-49 virtual meeting website link is broken. So it doesn't go anywhere.
Okay, yes, this recording will be on the website and we'll look into that, Sam. Thank you for letting us know.
Okay.
All right, well, thank you all.
Appreciate your time and your comments. It's very helpful because this is the input we need to move forward with some amount of confidence that we're really out there listening. Thank you very, very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we're going back to the big room. Put on our party hats.